Well, welcome to Thinkman Circle. We have a very special guest today, Peter Demarest, and hello, Usha, I see you've joined us. He's wrote the book, The Central Question, which is about this notion of what is the value that we decide in making choices and in life. And I talked to him a little bit beforehand. I'm just going to cover a couple of basics on it. I bought this book for Sabine, and I'll be getting it in the mail. And we're going to be having some future sessions on what's called mindfulness by Martin Heidegger. And one way to consider it is being mindful of the way we're thinking, and what we're not thinking, and being mindful of the questions we're not asking. And it takes a little bit more attention to that. And in my understanding of Peter's work, and Harvey was with us last week, that it's about taking our A game to our decisions, and being full of awareness. So let's say A in awareness, probably defining it different, Peter, than you do. And then our B game is the biases that we have that we may not be aware of. And I think what Peter's work does is kind of make us aware of the biases. And I'm just going to mention Heidegger for less than 2 minutes, I think. Heidegger uses the word "enthink," and since we're the Thinkman Circle, it's kind of important that we study this. And he uses "enthink" throughout the book hundreds of times, and he uses the word "enthinking." And so I'm very intrigued by connections I'm seeing to axiology. But if you haven't gone slog through the book, you probably haven't seen it yet. And I just bought the cheapest copy at a bookstore for Sabine, and it was 3 times the price I paid for mine. So that shows you how much I love you, Sabine. And
I know that, David, and I really appreciate you and Grace Ann so much. You're just so.
no, Peter, Sabine's our Heidegger scholar, and whenever I do a PhD seminar, she comes in and does Heidegger diagrams and Heidegger translations from the German and things of that sort. So we have a background. But I'm intrigued by this new notion of Heidegger's from the 1930s that there's such a thing as mindfulness, being mindfulness of our thinking. And I notice that he develops a number of concepts that are not in the Being in Time book and not in the metaphysics book. And it's kind of nice to have that background of different examples and different notions. And since I'm all about mindfulness now with the work I'm doing and coaching and consulting, I'll just give you an example that's in one of the essays I put in the call for today. So there's such a thing as the dark side of leadership. Conger and a couple of other people have studied it. Vandercleef or something like that, have written articles about it. And if you look at Disneyland and their whole history, I've been writing about it for a number of years 40 years. Been writing about Disney history, that there was a big takeover attempt of the board of directors of Disney in 2023 and 2024, even a little bit of things going on before that. And a fellow who's a corporate raider was raiding Disney and demanding a seat on the board, saying that they weren't doing enough cost cutting, they weren't managing their stream channels as well as Netflix, etc., and that if he got a seat on the board, he would turn things around, get a new CEO instead of Bob Iger, and he had the backing of another Disney stockholder, big stockholder. So, but they had the vote in late 24, the shareholders, and they said no. But he did cause enough your strife, you know, and this is a concept that Heidegger writes about, the strife that's created in being. And Heidegger calls it the swaying of being. There's a swaying going on, let's say, of different approaches, different values, let's say, since we're talking about values today. And that we need to pay attention to the swaying. So the swaying of values that happen in Disney, when Nelson Peltz, the corporate raider, billionaire raider, tried to take over the board of Disney and get it going his way. He wanted to do cost-cutting, layoffs, everything to maximize shareholder value. So that's a particular kind of value, right? But what happened is Bob Iger was left with a divided shareholders who wanted to pursue, part of them wanted to pursue that, and they want to know, what are you going to do about all these problems that Nelson Peltz has brought up, even though we turned him down. So that left Bob Iger in the situation of having to enforce more layoffs. And I read in 2025 that they have more layoffs in 2025 going on. Now, why this is important to us, because if the decision maker is forced into a situation of putting shareholder value ahead of what David Cooperrider calls stakeholder. I'm sorry, stakeholders. So there's stockholders who want to maximize their returns and dividends, right? And then there's stakeholders that want a better Disney and want a better value for their buck as a consumer, and employees want a better work environment, and they want their benefits to be paid, etc. So that puts Bob Iger in a situation of having to be, I'm kind of defending him, that he's being a little bit more exploitive than he was in the previous decades. And it just goes to show you the notion of the values and axiology, as Peter will explain, is the science of values. And with that, I'm going to introduce Peter as somebody I'm taking a class from. Mm-hmm. And some of us are, and we're interested in maybe consulting with Disney. And since a number of the people we work with live in around where the Disney Burbank is, it's possible to do a project. But we're going to have to deal with the values, strife, and the swaying of being that's happening, the swaying, Heidegger calls it the swaying in between all the persons, swaying that's going on. So I think it's an interesting addition. And again, I'll follow up next week or the week after as we have time. And Sabine will be getting her copy of Mindfulness by Heidegger, and I'm sure she will scope out a lot of definitions and patterns. Hi, Betty.
Hello, I would love to interject just here, won't take a while. The word swaying, I'm trying to get it. So maybe it's something that Sabine can look into, or you could set me straight now.
I will be happy to. Actually, Betty, I had the same thought. I thought swaying, what term did he actually use in German? I'd love to know.
Good, that's your mission.
I had the same reaction to swaying.
It's in the book.
Yes.
That's the German term, so you will love all that. All the German.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But it's such a nice idea, this notion of the strife and swaying and being, that we need to pay attention to it, and Dasein is there with it, but it adds a whole other dimension to his work, I think. So anyway, what we're interested today, though, is in Peter Demarest and his amazing way of quantifying this and doing work to help organizations to deal with their values, I will say, swaying. Okay, so that's yours. Come on now, Peter.
Okay, all right. Well, hi, everybody. Hi again, Tom. Hi again, Olivia. We just got done a class, our first cohort class here. Wow, so many different places I could go. I'm going to start with Aristotle. Is that okay? Sabine? Okay. And actually, I'll share my screen here because I have a little PowerPoint that you'll recognize this guy, I guess, if you're a student of Aristotle, right? So I'm taking some excerpt from something that he said, because one of the great things about philosophers is on the surface you can twist anything they have to say to your own advantage. So we're going to do that, right? But let's see if this makes sense to you. So Aristotle wrote in Book 1, The Good for Man, that every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action, pursuit, is thought to aim at some good, parentheses, greater than itself. In other words, he says everything aims at some purpose greater than itself. And if you think about all the stuff in your life, it's true, right? There's your glasses, Sabine, have a purpose greater than just being glasses. They exist to help you see better, right? I know that because I have them too. He goes on to say, if then there is some end of the things we do, of all the things we do, will not the knowledge of it have great influence on life? Sure, if we knew what that ultimate thing is. So there must be some ultimate good, and if we knew what that was, then that would be really helpful. And if that's the case, wow, we must try, at least in outline, to determine what it is and which of the sciences or capacities it is the object, for this would be the most authoritative art and truly the master art. And of course, in his days, art was science, science is art. And we tend to separate them in modern world. In other words, the greatest science would be one that helps us to better understand what that greater good is. And I believe that the science of axiology and more modern neuroaxiology is, little reminder, time to show up for this, is in fact that greatest science, because it is the science of goodness. It is the science of value. One of these days I'll train it out of David to call it, where he calls it the science of values, because it's actually the science of value, and there's a relationship between value and values, but it's not always the relationship we wish it was. In other words, one of the reasons why companies create these core values statements as a way to try to get their people to behave themselves, but then they themselves don't act according to those core values, is because they don't value the values sufficiently when they're faced with choice. And the values tend to be not rooted in science, such as axiology, and as a result, they become negotiable. They become nice ideas, but conditional application. So I bring this up because Aristotle said 2,500 or so years ago that if we could understand what that real ultimate goal and that ultimate goodness is, and here comes a science founded or developed as a formal science you might be interested in, a German by the name of Robert Hartmann, born in the early part of the 19th century, fled Germany as Hitler was coming into power. He had a JD at the time, and as an associate judge was being pressured to support the Nazi regime, and he thought, as he fled Germany on a false passport with his family, If evil could be so leveraged and understood and organized to influence an entire country, could goodness be understood and value be understood in a way that we can leverage that to influence in a positive way? And he dedicated the rest of his life to that study. Came to the United States and ended up teaching at places like Ohio State, MIT, University of Tennessee, Nashville, University of Mexico City, Chicago, and he is considered the founder of the formal mathematical science of axiology, value science. And he did some pretty amazing things. He also developed what's called the universal hierarchy of value. It's an objective understanding of what value is and how it's created and how it's destroyed and how certain things actually have greater objective value than other things, and that it's only in the human mind that it's actually subjective. And he developed an assessment instrument called the Hartman Value Profile that allows us to look at how does an individual's subjective perceptions and judgments of value align to the objective and universal hierarchy of value, and it tells us an enormous amount about how that person thinks. And that's the basis upon which all of our work in neuroaxiology is ultimately about. If you have a 401k profit sharing plan, you have Dr. Hartman to thank for it because it's his fault. That is, he is considered also the father of profit sharing whole concept, and it's called different things in different parts of the country. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973, the year he died. It was won that year by Henry Kissinger, who only got 2 nominations. Hartman got 8 nominations, but he died before it was awarded, and they don't award it posthumously. Today, there's something called the Robert Hartman Institute. It's our 49th year, our conference this year. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm also the vice president of education for that. David talked about our book, Answering the Central Question, which was really a book that introduced the science of neuroaxiology to the world, where we integrate what we know from neuroscience with what Dr. Hartman's work in axiology, and it informed us at a whole nother level that Dr. Hartman sadly never actually got to. And we were thankful enough and lucky enough to get Stephen Covey's endorsement of the book, and as the science being a groundbreaking science. So it's a little background on what the science really makes, where it comes from and what it is. And it's not like I have a whole plan on exactly what to talk about today. So what I think I'll just do is share this little piece to compare what makes this so unique in the world. Almost everything well, if you think of this tree as the top half represents what you can observe. KPIs to a degree, actions and behaviors and the results. And if you think of performance itself as actually a measure of value creation, isn't it? Isn't performance, like we say, high performance is you exceeded in delivering the value that we expected. Underperformance is you didn't deliver all the value that we expected. So performance itself is actually a measure of value creation. And it arises out of people's actions and behaviors. And almost all mainstream approaches to organization development, coaching, training, education, etc., and I say mainstream, is rooted in personality and behavior change. Would you agree? Yeah. With the hope that somehow it's going to change thinking, because the reality is that significant and lasting improvements in performance, however you measure it, requires significant and lasting improvements in how people think. But how do you get people to improve their thinking without telling them they have to? That was a question that we asked a couple of decades ago. And we figured out a way to do that. And so our work in neuroaxiology, instead of trying to predict thinking by looking at behaviors, we're able to flip it. We're able to measure how people think directly, no questions asked. It's an exercise, the Hartman Value Profile. And as a result, be able to see how their thinking influences, drives their actions, their behaviors, their habits of mind, which ones are good, which ones serve them, which ones are biased and tend to undermine their ability. And then we teach something called valuegenic self-leadership, which requires a very high level of mindfulness of your being. Does that sound familiar, Sabine? Yes? So it's not just, we also have something we call presence of mind, which does include awareness of your surroundings outside of you, as well as what's going on inside of you, what your being is, and being able to choose your A game. Now, A game, what does A stand for? Technically, from the assessment, we're able to measure your best ways of thinking, and we call those assets. They are also authentic. They are not fake it till you make it kind of assets. They are actual, always good. Think of them as good thinking, and there's never a time when good thinking is a bad thing. Unlike dominant personality traits that overused become a liability, right? Or a weakness. So we're measuring all your good ways of thinking, defined as the ways of thinking that allow you to create greater value in all of its forms for all stakeholders. We also identify those ways of thinking that undermine all of that, which dominate about 85 to 95% of everything that we do. And then there's a whole application in the organization development world working with whole system change from the top down and the bottom up and everything in between that we call valuegenic organization development and leadership. Okay, so here's a important foundational principle. This actually doesn't come from axiology, it comes from science. That our perceptions and judgments of value, not values, as in aspirational, idealistic, our perceptions of judgment is what drives everything in the human mind and spirit. Everything. If you think about it, there is no decision you've ever made in your entire life, even the worst, most despicable, horrible, shameful thing you ever did, in the moment you made that choice, you thought it was the right thing to do, at least for you. Seriously, can you think of anything that's not true? Anything. A single thing in your whole life. But we don't always get it right, obviously. We make mistakes of the value of things. So we are attracted to the things that we think will create value. We pursue them. We resist and fight, avoid, and fear things that we think are going to diminish value or hurt us in some way. And then there's a whole lot of stuff in between we don't give two hoots about. We ignore. Like television shows you don't watch. Why don't you watch them? Because they don't have any value to you, right? It's pretty simple. But this is what drives everything. This is what drives our being. This is what drives our thinking. This is what drives our habits. It drove us before we even came out of the womb. And it continues to drive us. So what if, by understanding this, we start to realize that when people don't do what we expect them to do, or even what they said they would do, it's simply because they don't value it enough. That's it. And if we're in a role where we're influencing somebody, whether we're a coach, a trainer, a teacher, a leader, or just a friend, and they don't do it, they do something different than what was agreed on, it simply means that they didn't value it enough. New Year's resolutions, same thing. We just don't value it enough. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It just means we don't value it enough in those moments where we could take action around it. From a coaching standpoint, there's a certain accountability that can be applied, that if our client isn't doing what they agreed to do, we have some accountability to the fact that they're not doing it. And that accountability has to do with not having the conversations that really elevate the value proposition, that reveal the value, and providing some kind of structure for success so the client doesn't lose touch with that value when life shows up. And we can become better coaches by understanding that this is the real driving force behind it all. Even Ben Franklin, great quote, "I conceive the great part of the miseries of mankind are brought upon them by false estimates they have made of the value of things." And we see this all over in the world today, don't we? Everywhere. Thank goodness we have this work that we can do. So I'm going to pause the share here now and just toss it out, see if anybody has any questions, any thoughts around this. Yes, Sabine, you're on mute.
Thank you. My question is, how do you measure, actually? That's, how do you measure people's thinking? How do you quantify that?
Well, we have these electrodes that,
Oh,
no, I'm kidding, we don't.
okay. Well, come on. I have a friend who is, into, neurofeedback, so I don't know,
That's right, yes. So the Hartman Value Profile Assessment Instrument, let's see, do I have a picture of it in this slide deck? I do.
And is this, I guess I was wondering what form this takes. Are these questionnaires and?
It is you are presented with two sets of 18 words or phrases, words and phrases.
Okay.
Separately, so do
Okay.
through one and then the other, in which it's a forced ranking. And the instructions say, reading all of these 18 words and phrases, sort them in the order in which you believe they have value.
Oh,
The meaning of them has value from best to worst, to most good to most bad, if you will. And then there's a second set that works in a similar fashion. So the instructions are slightly different for the two sets of 18. These words and phrases are scientifically validated for the last 60 years
okay.
as being linguistic equivalents of axiological mathematical expressions. In other words, if you think of how the mind works, we give meaning to everything, and to give meaning is to give value. A life without meaning is a life without value to the person who doesn't feel like their life has any meaning. And that's part of what makes it work. There's a second part, and that is that these axiological expressions relate to what's called the hierarchy of value. It gets a bit complex, but Dr. Hartman identified three, here, I'll share this part, because this is part of it. There are, wait, let me go back. Sorry, wrong place. Okay, what is value? We have to understand what value is. And what Dr. Hartman said is the greater the complexity of attributes something needs, has to have in order to fulfill its definition, the greater its value. There's a little bit more underneath that. Maybe we'll come back to that. But for example, here are three categories of things. A car, factory, food, energy, physical, functional stuff, a loving family, and all that that can represent, and ideas, concepts, rules, etc. Which of these has the least and most complexity, do you think? Anybody? Everybody? What do you think? Any ideas?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Yeah, I'm looking at the icons, and if I look at car, factory, food, energy, I go Bing energy.
Okay.
I go family.
You go family? Okay. Anybody want ideas, rules, and concepts? Going once?
Me, ideas for sure.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Before I reveal the mathematical reality, let's look at. So I called up my partner and co-author, business partner Harvey one day. He was also my mentor that taught me my initial learnings in axiology. And I asked him, have you ever counted the number of attributes something has to figure out its value? And he laughed and said, absolutely not. I said, so how do we as human beings, as opposed to scientists, how do we determine value? And the answer was essentially what we've written over here on the other side from an applied. The greater the capacity to enhance quality of life as the ultimate purpose in life, the greater the value. So from that perspective, what has the highest value versus the least? Anybody? Everybody?
Human life.
I stick with family.
Loving family.
Loving family has the most? Okay.
Well, now that I see enhanced quality of life, I'm shifting.
To what?
Oh, loving family. I'm very conceptually oriented and meaning-making ideas,
Yes.
but if I'm truly honest, the loving family has to go further.
That's the correct order in both cases.
Okay.
Okay. Now, how does that reconcile? Well, actually, what we experienced right here is that subjective versus objective is sometimes two different things. Okay? But let's explore this. An idea, valued, by definition, idea, we either have it or we don't have one. From what Dr. Hartman identified as the systemic dimension. It's the realm of just right and wrong. And then once that idea becomes something in reality, like a factory or something, it has more value because now it's able to produce something. But what's the purpose of producing it? Ultimately, from a value creative standpoint, it's always to enhance quality of life. Mm-hmm. And in the big picture, by the way, this isn't just for people. This is also for the birds and the bees and the trees and the flowers and the moon up above. So we see a couple of things. Let me give you an example. How much value does the idea of a cure for cancer have? Just the idea. Well, it may have some value for the person who has the idea. You know, they get excited. They see an opportunity to make a difference. Maybe worth pursuing. So therefore it has value. But as an idea, it doesn't really have much value beyond that. What if that idea for a cure becomes an actual substance of some kind, whether it's a pill or a new kind of treatment of some kind? How much value does it have as a treatment? It's got more than an idea, doesn't it? Yeah? But where's the real value? It's in the life of the person whose cancer is cured. And the family, and the potential, and the future of that person. Who knows what that person could be? You know, like curing childhood cancer. Who knows what geniuses and amazing people they might have grown up to be and what they would contribute to the world. And the ripple effect, the butterfly effect of the families that are enriched because their people were cured from cancer. We could apply the same principle to a sunset. The idea of a sunset versus an actual sunset versus the experience that we have of an awesome sunset. Because from a functional standpoint, a sunset is just light going through the atmosphere. That's all it is. It's why we experience it. And if we're experiencing it with a loved one on our honeymoon, with just the right amount of wine in our system. Okay, anyway. So we see that both are true. And Dr. Hartman identified then that there is this thing we call the hierarchy of value. It looks like this. By the way, Dr. Hartman was also a very close associate and friend with Dr. Maslow of the hierarchy of needs. Okay? They vacationed together each year. They've wrote about each other in their various writings and books. So this hierarchy value is pure mathematics, and it's universally true. We just don't always live in accordance with it. And these are called the three dimensions of value. We can think of them in a couple of other ways, like the purpose of systemic stuff like concepts and ideas and rules and policies and processes, the stuff that we make up as human beings, is from a valuegenic perspective, put in its proper perspective, the sole purpose of these things is so that we can make better use of all of our resources, of our time, our energy, our materials, our raw materials, efficient and effective use for the purpose ultimately of creating quality of life. And if we engage systemic things for the purpose of making a profit at the expense of other people, that's a violation of the hierarchy of value. Now, there's complexities in it. A company, by definition, has to make some kind of revenue in order to even stay in business and employ people so that they can have funds. But we have to find the balance, and we have to be able to keep things in their proper perspective. And overwhelmingly, there is evidence that when companies actually do this, they dramatically outperform the Standard & Poor's, even from a stockholder perspective. And it's a cyclical nature. Like, what's the purpose of love? What's the purpose of joy? What's the purpose of inspiration? If God created us, what's the reason that we have that experience? What's the reason that there are chemicals in our body that when we do good, it feels good? When we come up with ideas for a better mousetrap, it excites us. No, one of the reasons is because it causes us to have a vision of possibility greater than where we are. It causes us to think about how can we create that better mousetrap? How can we create that and do the work and do the studies so someday maybe we will cure cancer, including non-medical cancers like what happens in governments and in leadership, these other forms of cognitive cancer, if you will, that create so much havoc and limit so much human potential. Well, maybe it's because that's how we keep improving. This is where abundance ultimately comes from, and it keeps repeating itself when we're in alignment with it. But when we break it, we break down. And when we break down, we're ultimately leading ourselves towards annihilation and non-existence. So this is important work, and it's pure science. That's what's pretty exciting, you know. So back to your question, Betty. The way the assessment works is the words and phrases in the assessment are mathematical equivalents or linguistic equivalents of not only the primary dimensions of value, but see, let's take people, intrinsic, the human spirit. We can value people intrinsically. We can love them, or we can hate them. We can disvalue them also. We can also value them according to their looks, how tall they are, how short they are, what color their skin is, or their hair is, or their eyes are, or what skills they might have, what resources they have in their knowledge, their skills, their physical capabilities and mental capabilities. Those are all extrinsic things that may relate to whether we think they will fulfill a particular role that we have, such as a coach, an OD professional, a teacher, a football player, or whatever. We can also value and disvalue people systemically, meaning based upon what political party they tend to follow, or what university they went to, or what letters are after their name, or how they see the world, or what rules they follow, what religion they follow, all kinds of different ways, whether they agree with us about whatever topic it may be. And if you do the math, we can value and disvalue intrinsically, extrinsically, and systemically in each of these, and that adds up to 18. And that's why there's 18 words or phrases. There's actually almost an infinite number of combinations that we could look at. Like we can value people for intrinsic reasons systemically. It gets even more complex, okay? And get into finite calculus and the like. There are actually 12.8 quadrillion, it's 15 zeros, different ways to complete and rank those two sets of 18 words and phrases. That's more people than have existed on the planet. Makes us all potentially, now, the vast majority of them fall into a pretty narrow range of it. But that's how the assessment actually works. And we're able to interpret how you rank things as how it influences your thinking.
That's very interesting, but I'm wondering, okay, as someone whose career was dominated by the pursuit of principles and theory, etc.,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if sometimes our intrinsic value is not completely wrapped up in the systemic, because that was part of our goal and our value system to begin with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course. Everybody, there's lots of people out here that are so wrapped up in the shoulds of the systemic, the have-tos of the systemic, the right and wrong of the systemic, morally, ethically, financially, habitually, that they have trouble loving themselves and others.
Well, actually, I'm thinking more in terms of the systemic in support of the intrinsic. And I give you the example. David and I followed for kind of a long time before I retired, and David continues, Henry Sauval's methods for both improving business and in getting to the bottom of where problems were, is problem solving. But the most important thing to look at to get anywhere at all was the system. The system enabled it. Without the system, we got nowhere. David, am I saying that right?
Betty, you were always right, It's my experience. But yeah, I've talked to Peter about Henry Saval's work.
Okay.
And, I presented at the conference we were both at. Unfortunately, we were keynotes at the same time.
Okay.
For two different tracks, but we've been catching up. And the new book I wrote that I'm sending out in the invites, I don't think I did this invite, but the last one is about Henry Saval's work and Peter Demarest and Harvey Schoep's work, and how I think they dovetail in important ways but I think you have to dig beneath the surface of Saval's work to get at the value of the person or the value of human potential
Yeah,
being the
it is
primary
very
mover.
intricate.
Yeah. But I think once you do that calculus, if we can call it calculus, then I think the two are translatable.
Okay, yeah.
Some
Thank
ways,
you.
not
I
exactly,
can see that.
some ways. And Henry Saval is the consummate scientist. It's all about collecting the qualitative, quantitative, financial, and being able to prove that this experiment you did in organizational change actually produced the results you said it was going to produce on those
Yeah.
three dimensions. So, but anyway, absolutely, I'm excited
Okay.
to find Peter's work and Harvey's work because and I've been talking to Henry Saval about it when I was in France about Peter's work, and he's still very active. I think there's a lot more we're going to see of his work in the years to come.
Well, so, and if I may, Betty, what the hierarchy of value teaches us is not that the systemic doesn't have value, but it needs to be understood that the purpose of a system, properly applied, is ultimately to make the best possible use of our resources that we can so that we can maximize quality of life for all stakeholders.
Okay, got it.
Okay?
Right, thank you.
Question?
And the intrinsic absorbs the extrinsic and absorbs the intrinsic, because this is infinite value. This is what Dr. Hartman called denumerably infinite. It could be really, really big, but you can count it. And this is, and the other thing about the systemic dimension is, if you think of a system, a good system has multiple components of an actual system, not just the idea of a system, but it has multiple components. But every component is a system in and of itself. So there's a granularity, and when people overvalue the systemic dimension too much, they tend to only see the forest and have trouble seeing the trees.
Okay.
But a healthy understanding and a healthy mind that can, what we call an asset in the systemic dimension, is someone who can see the forest and the trees. Undervaluing it, they tend to see trees, but not the whole forest, metaphorically speaking, okay?
All right.
And
I was just wondering if I could have.
comment. Go ahead, Usha.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you. But I have been grappling with something dealing with the common good. And how do you deal in your system with, say, an individual clashing with an institution and an institution clashing with society, or society is interpreted by the people who are in power in that society? I've just been, how would you reconcile those clashes? Because what is the common good?
Well, first of all, I would charge them a ton of money.
I'm sorry?
I would charge them a ton of money to reconcile it. I'm kidding. Sort of. It's very complex because you've got so many different people involved, all having a highly subjective thought process of what's of value and what isn't of value. But this is one of the reasons why this science is so vitally important, and it's probably not going to get cured on a global basis in any of our lifetimes, but we have to start somewhere. When you talk about the common good, one of the things about the science of axiology, there are two sets of 18 words and phrases. One of them has to do with how you perceive the world outside of yourself, beyond and around you. The other one is how you see yourself, your roles, your future, etc. And what Dr. Hartman pointed out is that at the intrinsic level, you have equal infinite value to all other people because it's infinite. Infinite is infinite. infinite to the infinite is still, to the power of infinite is still the infinite. So this is an interesting twist of the mathematics, that a single human being has infinite value, so does all human beings combined, still infinite. So it begs a bit of a koan when, we talk about, do I sacrifice my life for the betterment of the human race? It's a big, deep philosophical question. Our goal today is just to have people start to think more axiologically, to start to think in terms of how do we create greater value in our lives and through our work and through our relationships. We don't tell people what decisions they need to make. We teach principles. And we reveal to them where their thinking aligns to these principles and where it doesn't. And the amazing thing from a self-leadership perspective is when you understand what your biases are, you see that they are causing all the trouble you have in your life. No matter how big or small it might be. And that your assets are where you are the happiest and where you are the most capable, most brilliant, most valuegenic is the word that we give it, value generative. And then it becomes a simple choice. Do you want to be the authentic you, or do you want to allow your habits that are not you, your biases, to run your life and get you into trouble? How that relates back to that common good, we're dealing with the complexity of the human mind to start with, the human heart, mind, and spirit. We're dealing with the pressures of generational cultures and societies that have been after the almighty dollar, and the fears of being controlled and dominated by other people. So we need to control and dominate before they do. Mutual assured destruction and all of those things. And it's going to take decades to unravel it. But we have a science that speaks to what Aristotle said 2,500 years ago. And for the first time in human history. Now, many of you have not heard of axiology. Well, why would that be if this is such a great science? And I'll tell you why. Because up until we integrated neuroscience and the findings of modern neuroscience to understand the cognitive and neuroplasticity and what motivates and things like that, the only way that axiologists could teach anybody anything was to teach them what you see on the screen. And tell them, if you're not thinking this way, you're wrong. Who likes to hear that? Who here likes to hear that you're wrong? Doesn't work very well. And it's lived as such an academic, philosophical thing that it didn't become even what, say, emotional intelligence is. But there's a lot of underpinnings in axiology that inform emotional intelligence too. Now we're at a different place. Now we have a better understanding of the science. We have a better understanding of the human mind and the human spirit and its motivation, but we also understand how minds can change. And so we've developed a pedagogy that supports that process without positive affirmations, without fake it till you make it, without feel the pain and do it anyway, and without ever trying to fix anybody, but simply unlocking and unleashing where they are authentically, that's a game, authentic. Actual intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. Awareness, A game. Asset, A game. Lots of A words, right, that relate to the A game. Instead of being dominated by our own B game. It doesn't completely answer your question, Usha, but it heads in the direction that we need to go.
It's interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What else?
Well, there's a lot else. I'll throw one in.
Yeah.
We want to have David Trofimo be a guest when he comes back from Scotland.
And I think the greater good, right? I really love that, and I love what Aristotle says about that too. And I remember, like in Poetics, he also talks about how it feels good to do good. But I also want to add that, what interests me is, the creation of value, and then, personal values and the values of greater groups. How, for example, does a society establish values that are accepted as, as good? Because what we're seeing now all over the world, right, it was brought up, is, the clashes between values, and people are fighting over this. And even within a society, right, people have different values, and what's of value to me might not be of value to somebody else. It depends on my circumstances, right? I mean, for me, if I'm poor, okay, it's of greater value to get, any job. Would I, in the circumstances, would I really ask, how ethical is this company? Look, I need to feed my children. You know what I mean? I think it's so context dependent.
Well, they are hard decisions sometimes when we are in a non-abundant state, whether that's mental, financial, physical, whatever that may be. It can be kind of hard, but espoused values, when we espouse a value, in fact, I would posit this. If we have to espouse a value, it's because we don't actually have it as a value intrinsically, okay? And at that level, they are purely systemic. They are just an idea. They are just an ideal that we think we should have, and we create them because we think that they will create some level of value, most often self-centrically. So we differentiate between a self-centric mindset and a value-genic mindset. All biases are self-centric, motivated, and most of our habits are driven by self-centric habits. And there are instances, for example, I remember a number of years ago when the Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland got together and said, you know what? We're allowing our systemic religion kill us and kill each other and killing each other's families, an eye for an eye. And we're not valuing human life. It's not helping us create greater quality of life for any of us. Those that were able to get together to see that. And the problem we see in the world is people think that their values are right, but they are at the bottom of the hierarchy of value. That's what makes this science so important to bring out. Let me put it in this perspective. Prior to 1903, mankind for centuries, millenniums, wanted to learn how to fly like the birds. And they tried all kinds of contraptions. They strapped feathers, they built boards, they jumped off of cliffs. A lot of people got killed. And it wasn't until 1903 that the Wright brothers, at least who's credited with it, there's some argument as to whether they were the first or not, but here in the U.S. we celebrate our Americans. So the Wright brothers were credited with the first airplane, and what made that happen wasn't trial and error. It was mathematics. They began to figure out and work out the mathematics of aerodynamics, and it's all in their drawings about lift and drag and all of that. And after thousands of years of trying through trial and error, suddenly there's a moment in time when the mathematics of aerodynamics is born. And 70 years later, just 70 years later, not even a whole century, we put a man on the moon and brought him back safely because of the science, the mathematics. And nobody would think to jump off of a cliff without some contraption that adhered to the laws of aerodynamics unless you're trying to commit suicide. And belief doesn't do it. No matter how much you believe, if you jump off of a 10-story building thinking you're going to fly, what happens? Some of you have heard this before. You fly once, and that's it.
Once.
Right? The thing is that Dr. Hartman discovered the mathematics of value dynamics, how value is created and destroyed. And he'd figured out a way to measure how people are either creating or destroying value in their lives and in the lives of others based upon the biases and the assets that they've evolved over their lifetime and through their lived experiences.
Interesting. I really love this, Peter. Thank you.
So what becomes possible when those principles, which, by the way, nobody actually needs to know them, it's just helpful when we can live in accordance. Like a baseball player doesn't have to know the laws of physics in order to hit the ball, but they do need to know the principles of hitting the ball. Swinging the bat and the stance, golf, same thing. Driving a car, you don't need to know all the mechanics of a car. You just need to know how to maneuver the switches and levers and pedals and things like that. Well, that's what we teach in our process. We don't actually teach the science until we're way down the road, you know. Maybe at the beginning here, like these things, that there is one, but that's enough. David.
Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit more about why I want David Trofimo as a guest. Got a chapter in the new book about him. It's not the first time I've written a book with a chapter about David Trofimo, by the way. And what I would like to see the two of you eventually talk after David comes back from wherever he is, which will be unmentioned, and we look at the science, the way in which what he calls auxiliary assumptions are measured in axiology. And he's got a particular way, I think, of looking at experiments. If we look at org development as an experiment of change, where what propositions do you think you're actually changing, and how are you testing them? So all those come with auxiliary assumptions on the theory and the method and the process, etc. And the whole thing is you can't measure everything at once, and you can't experiment on everything at once, if I'm summarizing David, which is always dangerous because David has a very precise way of looking at things, which is accurate, by the way. But if I could venture my guesstimate that we could pay attention to what values we think we're changing and what value results we're getting, which is where axiology, the measurement of value, would be able to make a real contribution, I think, in this work. But I'd also like to see David's work done, because he's got he's actually going around the world to different statistical associations, changing the way that we treat statistics, or what do we do with statistics, and they're actually listening to him, and they're actually celebrating a sea change in statistics. And I so far I don't see you doing any of the things that David is changing against, which would be null hypothesis, p-value, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I think the ranking thing demonstrates one of his pet projects is to identify the position rather than the mean of something, rather than averaging something, which I think the ranking does that. You're repositioning the value of 18 and another 18. Now, after that, I don't know what your mathematics is, but I'm hoping to learn about it in some of the sessions when you get to it, and just to keep, because I really think we need a better science of statistics and a better science of interventions. And I think it's amazing work you're doing, which I applaud.
The reason why Dr. Shufutinsky at Sacred Heart University believes that neuroaxiology is a game changer for OD is not just because of its power as a tool for intervention, but we can actually measure the impact of other interventions as measured by how people think and the change between how they thought before the intervention versus how they tend to think after the intervention. Do we see improvements in their view of their quality of life, their capacity to make good judgments, and improve thinking is what it boils down to. And it's not just like there's a measure called enjoying whatever you're doing. And it tells us whether they're actually enjoying their life very much, along with a number of other measurements and how they approach life. So we can actually use it not only as an intervention tool, but as a measure of other interventions as well, and the impact that they have.
That's what I'm hoping for, just to let you know. So carry on.
Okay.
And there is, I think there is, a good measure. I had a similar conversation with David, recently about what are people spending their time on, and where words and actions diverge. Mm-hmm. Right? If you say, oh, I really like cooking, and then you don't do it, well, obviously that's a problem, and the same goes with anything. So I think where you put your time, and where you put your time is where you feel good, right? What makes you happy, then you feel you're truly in the right place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's statistically, back to that word, nearly 75% of people significantly undervalue the measure enjoying whatever you're doing. And tens of thousands of people. People are miserable. They're faking it like they're not a lot, but they're miserable overall with their varying degrees of misery, I suppose, as and it's all by, as Franklin said, false estimates.
Wow.
But not just their own, it's also the people that they have to report to, the people they do their work to that are also part of the problem.
And where do the false estimates come from?
Life. We first start to become more cognitively aware of it for most people in elementary school, in kindergarten, when we're told that when we fail to do the homework or do whatever exercise right, that it's implied we need to be better. We need to fix our flaws. And that concept in the grading systems just keeps drilling home this thing. If you're not getting an A, something's wrong with you. You need to fix whatever the reason is, and then you have influences like, hey, if somebody hits you, hit them back. Don't let them do this, and then you have people who are taught that they need to be bullies so they can dominate, and it just snowballs all over the place. And it's this morass of influence that develops what psychologists will tell you 85 to 95% of everything we do as human beings is habit driven, and those habits are primarily driven, we now know, by the biases that we measure in our assessment.
And yet biases are what helps guide us through life. When we don't know what to do, we have our go-to way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I like the answer to life. Life does sort of push us along. And Tom, I think you want to say something. I just want to say that when I came back from the Peace Corps in West Africa, I was totally off my rocker because I had developed for 3 years in West Africa a feeling that life was more important in certain directions. And in the States, I was watching a kid go crazy because he got the wrong flavor of ice cream. So my idea is like when you have to live in no air conditioning for 3 years, you can adjust to the heat after that. But if you've always been air conditioned from the shop to your car to your apartment, you're going to be easily miserable as soon as the electricity goes off.
Yeah.
You know, so I just like to say, I think life really has a lot to do with the biases I see.
Yeah, definitely. And to the point of biases help us. Yes, your biases have helped you tremendously to get you to where you are.
Yeah.
The human brain is designed to habituate things that have to do with self-protection and self-preservation, first and foremost, and very, very quickly. Like, how long did it take for you to learn to put the brakes on when somebody pulled out in front of you in a car?
Yeah.
Like, pretty, it took my son a few extra tries, but nonetheless, but those developing the more altruistic, the more common good, the more valuegenic habits is not how the brain is ideally wired, but it is also wired to feel good when we do good. And somehow we have to try to navigate that through our lifetime. And maturity is about getting ever closer to our fuller potential, like in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the self-actualization, which is actually a misnomer. It's how people most think of self-actualization isn't actually what Maslow meant when he talked about it. That's a whole other topic. But here's the good news. If biases drive 85 to 95% of all the success you've ever had, what would happen if you could add another 5 or 10% to that? In other words, you're only at your A game, 5 to 15% of the time. What if you could add another 5 or 10%? That's just a couple of better decisions a day. That's it. It's not much. And if we can do that with thousands of people, we can start to millions of people. We can have the impact, change the trajectory of our world.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask, have you ever approached the schools about this? Would be so powerful for kids to learn early in their lives. And I think we're actually programmed to learn the opposite for nefarious reasons. So I just would love to see this.
We have, we've been trying to get it. There is a school psychologist in the Denver inner city school system that is madly in love with what this all represents and has sort of informally been working it into the elementary schools of the Denver school system very early on, and we're hoping to. We basically need to find somebody who can write a grant. Unfortunately, schools don't have a lot of money, and if we can get some grant money to do some more formal work, I think we can make a real difference. And it involves the teachers first, so that they're setting up the classrooms in a way that the kids, because we're talking about second, third, and fourth graders, they're not going to take the assessment, but we can still influence them in those lived experiences, Betty, that we've been talking about. But we're also, Sacred Heart University is integrating it into their PhD curriculum. There's a couple of other universities that we met at IODC that are interested in doing that, because a lot of this is going to have to be, dare I say it, trickle down, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I was a professional grant writer for 15 years, and I still got some skill. So if you need a volunteer, just let me know.
You've just been voluntold.
My suggestion, I did snag 200,000 one time in my entire career, not a second time. But the big thing I learned from that is you absolutely have to find you have to match your purpose of what you're doing to the grant giver's purpose.
Yes.
And that can be twisted. I mean, you just find the angle. But for example, mine was the year that the European Union wanted mobility across the world. And that just happened to be my game too. But my brother, who studied synapses in muscles, he matched himself to the American military because they wanted to know how germ warfare worked. But it took imagination quite often to see how we can satisfy somebody else's main goals. So the value system alignment,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mhm.
We're working on some inroads to the corrections, quote unquote, prison systems, law enforcement.
Yeah, that would do it. That would do it.
Would help a lot. As a company, our main focus is organizations and their leadership. Because once you can influence an organization, you're influencing an entire workforce and their families. And, many of the spouses of the workforce are teachers and owners of other companies and the like. So,
Cool.
Tom, did you have your hand up, or was that my mouse?
I was thinking that. It reminded me that when I was 33 years old, I went and asked my father, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Why in the world would you ask me that?" And I said, "Because you've never told me." What do you think his reaction was? Of course I love
everything for you. Look what I did for you, right?
you. Wrong.
Oh,
Wrong answer. His answer was, "My parents never told me either. Just get over it." So when we're talking about education and school systems and, to me, it goes deeper than that. It's like a multi-generational problem that, is just, will take a long, long time to undo the damage that somebody. And I said, "Well, why would you say it?" And he said, "Well, my parents never told me either." And I'm sure if I went back and asked my great-grandfather, he'd say the same thing, and so would his father. So, I mean, it was just part of the Germanic philosophy that they had back in those days. So, anyway.
yeah, that's the lived experiences or lack thereof.
Can I just add that a lot of the energy work that we're incorporating with David's group is healing generational trauma. So the understanding I have is that if we heal ourselves, we're actually healing our ancestors at the same time. It's kind of a nice thought, although we might never find out.
Oh, I don't know. I think we might.
Okay.
I think we might.
When the veil thins and we can talk to them.
There's, has anybody ever read some books called Journey of Souls?
I just got it. I think you mentioned it, so
Didn't
it's on my
you?
bed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk after you read that.
I think, okay, yeah, because we talked about my son who passed away, right. So I'm hoping to, get more peace around that.
Could you go into that book a bit?
Sure. It's written by a Dr. Michael Newton, who's a psychologist. And it's the first in a series of books, actually. The second one is called Destiny of Souls. And now the other books are missing from my memory at the moment. But he was doing past life regression hypnosis. And he discovered one day that he had regressed somebody to life between lives, between incarnations in a body. And well, that's pretty interesting. I wonder how I did that. And so he continued to experiment and kind of perfected the process and spent 10 years working with thousands of people. And in those sessions where people are regressed back to spirit state, he would ask a ton of questions like, what's the purpose of life? Why do we reincarnate? How does it work? Why does it take hundreds or thousands of years to reincarnate? And what's it like when you're in a spirit and versus the body? Just tons and tons of questions. And the answers were extraordinarily consistent. And so he wrote a book about the findings and what it must be all about. The gist of it is that life is kind of like impromptu theater, where we agreed to get together over a course of many hundreds of years, and we're each going to play a specific role at a specific time or time frame within each other's lives. And it may be I'm the person who's going to broadside you at an intersection because I ran a stop sign or you did. But that sets life into some kind of trajectory. Or it might be, well, in our last time you were my parent, now you're going to be my child. Or we're going to have a disease, or we're going to be wealthy, or we're going to be poor. And it's all about growth of the soul. But there's no predetermination beyond, if you imagine, what was that TV show with, whose line is it anyway? Do y'all remember that TV show? Hilarious show, right? Each person is given a role to play, but once it starts, it's anybody's guess where it goes. And that's kind of how life works. And we either have the experiences and learn and grow from them or not. But the point is, there is purpose, as Aristotle said, even in that. There is purpose somewhere, according to those books, in Olivia, son passing, of my wife passing, of the different things that we choose to put ourselves into over the course of our lives, that give us those biases, that give us those ways of thinking. We might have one lifetime decided to be a crusader in the Crusades as a Christian, killing the Muslims. In another life, we might have been a Muslim. What it does, in reading the book, is give us faith that even in the worst of times, there is some reason, even if we don't know what it is. And it's our task to live into it, and the possibility that its reason is good.
Wow. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Sabine, Aristotle. What I like about Aristotle is reducing him to what I learned back there on a college campus. Mm-hmm. There are 4 causes. The formal, the final, I'm saying them in the wrong order. No, the efficient, the formal, the material, the efficient, the formal, and the final. Mm-hmm. For thousands of years or centuries or whatever, everybody keeps saying, oh, that purpose. There is no purpose. We are just random, we're billiard balls on a table, and there is no creator, blah, 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 blah. And I just, over a lifetime, including those times when I was maybe a day or 2 or something like that away from killing myself. I don't want to get dramatic here, but I had those dark times. And what I say simply and retroactively, I could never pull the trigger. I didn't even get a gun. And that's a messy way to do it anyway. But the point is, if you think that life has purpose, thinking, I'm a human being, if I think that it has a purpose, all I know is that's a better place for me. And we're talking about values. The idea that my life has a purpose is better than, I don't know why I'm here. There's no reason for me to be here. There's no point in my being here. And I say, this is what we have with people who commit suicide. I don't fit. I don't belong. There's absolutely no clue. I have no clue as to what I'm supposed to be doing. Most days, I have no clue as to why I should be doing anything. Mm. And the answer, given so eloquently by Olivia and her daughter and Tom, and I'm reminded of a book I was trying to scramble around, Olivia, that I think Vanessa mentioned. Hellinger is his name, Love's Hidden Symmetry. And I started to look that up and go into that. And I had to, great stuff. But the purpose is, I'm supposed to be doing something. Nobody has given me a book telling me what it is. I have to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. And we want somebody to hand us, the little guidebook. Here is what you need to do. And we're suckers for that, And our culture, whoever's culture, the whole damned earth all over it, has all these people saying, Dan, have I got the book here? Here's the answers. I got it. It's all right here. And if you read only through 13 chapters, you'll arrive at bliss. And no, you figure out what bliss is by having it happen, not by Mickey Mouse and his wand and the sorcerer's apprentice. I'm going to make these brooms carry all the water. Wow, I'm going to be powerful. And he winds up drowning because of that. And so the idea of, it's dangerous if you start guessing what you're supposed to do and doubting what you're supposed to do and being unsure of what you're supposed to do. And I go, QED. If you aren't doubting and if you are certain, you're in trouble. Thank you all for this afternoon of
if I can share this with you, because I think it's relevant, Paul.
Yeah.
Everything that we do and everything that axiology has taught us is what's on the screen right now. And it's about, from a purpose standpoint, an ultimate purpose standpoint. Yes, as we come out of the womb, we start to scream, and we spend the early days of our life as a parasite getting everything that we want, trying to get everything that we want and need. And we scream when we don't get it. But eventually, we need to flip the switch. What's it say somewhere in the Bible about giving up our childish ways? And the more mature is the recognition that real success in any worthwhile endeavor is about the value you create, not the value you get. And what this does is open us up to the possibility where we start to recognize our purpose, if you want to say life purpose. And I think a lot of it is you just pick one and see if it turns you on. So long as it is about creating value in the world, greater value. And one of the things we teach and why the book is called what it's called is what we call the central question of life, love and leadership. Take a screenshot of it. What choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value, keeping in mind that net means all things considered, pros and cons for all people concerned, yourself and others, but not just others and not just yourself, both short and long term. 3 of you here have heard the next line, haven't you? There's only 2 groups of people who are all knowing enough to answer that question perfectly all the time. Do you know who they are? Paul, I saw, I think, yours walk up the stairs behind you not too long ago. Sabine, you've mentioned the name of yours.
Your spouse and God.
Yes, they're all knowing, right? And the other is teenagers.
God and then your spouse. Yeah.
And the other is teenagers.
Oh.
I got that right.
Yeah. For the rest of us, we have to think about it. This question has changed lives, and I encourage you to really write it down, take a screenshot of it, do whatever you need to do, and ask it of yourself anytime that you are confused, overwhelmed, uncertain, wondering, procrastinating, upset, angry, frustrated, anytime. You've got a decision to make, and it automatically will cause your brain to step into more of its A game, more of that where doing good feels good. And I promise you, it can change your life. Olivia?
I know we're out of time, but I'd love to ask a quick question. have you heard of this research where if you say to your brain, so in this case, you're saying, what choice can I make? What action can I take to create the greatest net value? So there's this research I heard where if you tell your brain it's really easy, like you'll say, I can't believe how easy it is to figure out the next choice to create the greatest value, the greatest net value. And then your brain serves you to make you right. Have you heard of that?
Not that one specifically.
Okay. It's kind of like, if you're struggling with something, you just say, I can't believe how easy it is to find my keys or whatever it is. And then it changes things. So anyway.
As you'll discover, and the science has me become very anti-positive affirmation to compensate for negative self-talk. But there is a particular way that we can use what we call statements of validation. They are associated with our assets, so they are statements that we know to be true. Absolutely 100% know to be true. Not a fake it till you make it. So I think there probably is something along the lines of what you're talking about that can work really well if it's in alignment with an asset as opposed to a bias.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
And we can talk more about that at some point.
Thank you for this whole session. It's been
Yeah,
wonderful.
thank you. Peter, if you stop sharing, I got to wrap this up. And thank you. So on behalf of the Thinkment Circle, our think tank, we asked to give you thanks and gratitude for sharing this today. I think it was a very professional presentation of high value for all of us, I would assume, at least for me. And I'm looking forward to learning more about axiology, Peter. Thank you for being a guest here on it. And Thinkment's think tank. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. And love you all.
Thank you,
Love you
thank you,
too.
thank you. This was wonderful.
Yeah.